The chandeliers glimmered overhead, their light reflecting like fragments of stars across the grand ballroom. Expensive perfume hung in the air, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses and muted laughter. It was a night of luxury, one of those evenings where the city's elite gathered to toast their power and wealth. Among them sat Adrian Cole, the billionaire known for his ruthlessness in business and his intimidating presence in public. He was a man of great influence, yet at his side was the only person who made him feel like just a man, his wife, Elena. She didn't dress herself in diamonds or carry herself with pretension, yet her presence outshone every glittering jewel in that room. She had an ease about her, a gentleness that softened Adrian's sharp edges. To him, she was not only the love of his life but the anchor that kept him grounded when the world threatened to consume him with greed and power. Adrian was used to being admired, feared, and envied. But he wasn't used to feeling vulnerable, and tonight vulnerability came in an unexpected form. The evening was unfolding as expected, wine poured, toasts made, polite conversations exchanged, when a young waiter approached their table. He carried himself with quiet dignity, his uniform crisp, though his eyes betrayed something deeper. Unlike the other servers, whose smiles were hollow and rehearsed, this one seemed distracted, as though his thoughts were far away. Yet when his gaze landed on Elena, his composure faltered completely. He stepped forward to refill her glass, and in the small movement of adjusting the tray, his hand brushed gently against her arm. It was fleeting, accidental perhaps, but in that instant Adrian felt a fire burn inside him. His chair scraped back loudly against the polished floor as he rose to his feet, towering over the young man. His voice erupted with a fury that silenced the entire ballroom. "Don't touch my wife!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned toward them. The music faltered as the musicians froze mid-note. The room that had moments earlier been full of laughter now throbbed with tension. Elena's eyes widened in shock, her cheeks coloring with embarrassment. The young waiter stiffened, his knuckles tightening around the tray he carried, his face pale as though the very life had drained from him. Adrian's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but before he could unleash more words, the waiter's voice broke through the thick silence. It was soft, trembling, but filled with something rawer than fear. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to. It's just, she looks exactly like my mother." The words hung heavy in the air. Adrian blinked, stunned, his anger dissolving into confusion. The waiter's voice cracked as he tried to steady himself. "I lost her 2 years ago. I never got to say goodbye. When I saw your wife, it was like she was standing there again. I lost control. Please forgive me, I didn't mean any harm." Adrian stood frozen. His fury, so quick to ignite, was suddenly replaced by a feeling he couldn't place, something between shame and unexpected compassion. Elena, her hand still resting on the table, looked up at the young man, her eyes glistening with tears she hadn't anticipated. She reached across and gently placed her hand on Adrian's arm, urging him to stay quiet. Then she turned her gaze back to the waiter and spoke in the gentlest tone. "What was your mother's name?" The young man swallowed hard, his lips trembling. "Maria," he whispered. Elena's eyes widened, and a faint smile flickered on her lips, though it was tinged with sadness. "That was my mother's name, too." The coincidence stunned everyone within earshot. The guests, who had moments ago leaned forward eagerly, hoping to witness scandal, now sat back with unease. The tension had shifted from gossip to something sacred. The young man's grief was so palpable it silenced the urge for judgment. Adrian, whose heart had been a fortress for so long, felt something unfamiliar crack within him. The waiter, whose name they soon learned was Lucas, apologized again, bowing slightly before attempting to retreat, but Elena stopped him. "Please, sit for a moment," she said softly. It was an invitation that defied the unspoken rules of wealth and status. A billionaire's wife inviting a waiter to sit at her table was unheard of, yet it felt natural, necessary. Lucas hesitated, glancing nervously at Adrian, but when Adrian gave a small, reluctant nod, he lowered himself onto the edge of a chair, still trembling. In halting words, Lucas began to speak. He told them about his mother, how she had worked long hours, sacrificing everything for him, how she would hum softly in the kitchen while making meals she often didn't eat herself just to make sure he had enough. He spoke of her laughter, her warmth, and the emptiness that filled him when illness took her too soon. He admitted that sometimes, when exhaustion and grief collided, he still half expected her to walk through the door, calling his name. And tonight, when he saw Elena, the resemblance had shaken him to his very core. Elena listened intently, her hand never leaving Adrian's arm. Her compassion poured out effortlessly, a balm to Lucas's raw wounds. Adrian, however, struggled. He wasn't used to moments like these. He had spent years in boardrooms, silencing emotions, making ruthless decisions. But watching Lucas's vulnerability stirred something buried deep within him. He realized that beneath the weight of wealth and power, he too knew fear, the fear of losing Elena, the only person who made him human. That night didn't unravel into scandal. Instead, it shifted into something extraordinary. Adrian, against his usual nature, invited Lucas to meet them privately after his shift. The boy hesitated, suspicious of the billionaire's motives, but eventually agreed. Over the weeks that followed, an unlikely bond began to form. Adrian and Elena listened to more of Lucas's stories, offered him meals, and quietly helped him with small things he wouldn't accept as charity. Adrian learned that Lucas had abandoned his college dreams when his mother fell ill, choosing instead to work multiple jobs to cover medical bills. Even after her passing, debt clung to him like a shadow. Adrian saw in Lucas not a servant, but a fighter, a young man who carried his grief with dignity, refusing to surrender. Something about his spirit reminded Adrian of his younger self, before money had turned him cold. He began to see that compassion wasn't weakness but strength. Through Elena's encouragement, Adrian offered to sponsor Lucas's education. At first, Lucas resisted. Pride stiffened his spine, and he refused to be pitied. But Adrian's words finally broke through. This isn't charity. This is respect. For your mother, for the sacrifices she made, and for the man you've become because of her. Don't waste that. Lucas eventually agreed, tears spilling down his cheeks as he nodded. For the first time since his mother's death, hope flickered in his eyes. Adrian, who had shouted so angrily that night, found himself humbled. Elena, watching quietly, knew that this was the man she had always believed him capable of being. Months passed, and Lucas's life began to change. He enrolled in school, excelling with a determination fueled by memory and gratitude. He often visited Adrian and Elena, not as a server, not as a charity case, but as family. Their conversations grew deeper, filled with laughter and healing. Adrian, who once thought himself untouchable, realized that his true wealth was not in his empire but in the lives he touched with kindness. One quiet afternoon, the three of them sat together in a small cafe, away from chandeliers and ballrooms. Lucas shared stories of his classes, his ambitions, his dreams of one day building something meaningful in his mother's name. Elena listened with pride, her hand resting warmly on Adrian's. Adrian looked at them both and felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. He thought back to that night, to the fury that had consumed him when a stranger's hand brushed his wife's arm, and he realized how easily he might have destroyed this bond. If not for Elena's gentle intervention, if not for Lucas's trembling honesty, he might have remained blind. That night had begun with anger, but it ended with understanding. And so, the billionaire who once shouted in jealousy learned that compassion could disarm fear, that vulnerability could connect strangers, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected encounters. Lucas found in them a second family, Elena found another soul to nurture, and Adrian found a lesson he would never forget. The truest measure of a man is not the power he holds, but the love and kindness he gives.